Okay, Science Peeps, it's Miss CG. This is our walkthrough today for our Chapter 3 lesson on heredity. If you are in my Period 2-3 and my Period 5, you'll be watching this walkthrough on May 13th. If you are in my Period 8-9 class, this is for May 14th, starting for you, these activities. Okay, so let's begin. Let's go to our activity list here. Okay, so you're going to follow these instructions at the top, the first one. And I do tell you on here, May 13th, this is for periods 2, 3, and 5, 6. May 14th, this is for period 8, 9. Okay, I again also have listed here on the side, and I'll be doing this for you, what time we meet. If you just click the link at the top of our Baby Bloops page, I'll also post the link since some of you are having a hard time with that link. Okay, so let's get started. So we are going to complete on your sheet, on your end, activities from pages 74 to 76 on your Google Doc. We're doing figure 2 and assess your understanding 1A and 1B. So if you go over to your page, okay, so you're going to look for the chapter 3, and it's going to be this one. Okay, 74 to 76. And I have this written here. Remember, there is also an ed puzzle today. So watch the ed puzzle. Tell me what your score is out of 10. Doesn't matter what your score is as long as you complete it and try. All right. Now remember, we're not submitting anything today until I tell you to on the activity list, on the HyperDoc. So I do tell you when to submit. Again, I know there was a question about that before. All right. So let's go to the workbook. And I'm going to go back a little bit. Just as a refresher, I want to show you guys how to get to the workbook. So www.pearsonrealize.com. Okay, you hit sign in. I'm already signed in, but sorry about that. Let me sign out here. When you sign in, you're going to put your username, which is your Google email address, and your password, which is your Google password, and then you add an extra 0 to the end. So you sign in. And on this page, you should see, actually, we're lucky enough that this appears on the bottom for your book. Okay. So you just click on this link here. You can click on your e-text. And then, you know what? This might be actually the teacher version. So I apologize for that. All right, let's try that again. I put in a student version this time, just to make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing. Yep, same thing. Okay. So you click on the book down here, which is that. You don't have the e-text. That's the only difference here. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into your lesson. So we're at chapter 3. We're on lesson 1. So click on lesson 1. And then scroll all the way down to the bottom. And this is the link. So chapter 1, chapter 3, lesson 1. You open in a new window. And then there you are. Okay. So I just wanted to show you how to do that. And our reading comes from this and our activities come from this. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start with talking about somebody called Gregor Mendel. Mendel was a scientist in the 1800s. He was actually a monk. And a little background history on him. His parents really believed in education. They wanted him to be educated. Not everybody had to be educated back then. That was not a requirement like it is today. But he took an interest in the sciences, but he went on then to become a monk. Well, one of his jobs at the monastery was to garden, because that's, they didn't go out to the supermarket. They lived a very simple life. They made their own food. So one of the things that they grew were pea plants. And he started making these discoveries, started noticing these things because of his science background, because his parents wanted him to be educated. He started making these connections with these pea plants. Like, why do they look a certain way? Why when these two plants blend and they have offspring, why does that offspring look a certain way? And so he's considered the father of genetics because he started us thinking about this whole thing. The funny thing is, he did a lot of research. We're going to talk just very briefly about it. There's a video that you're going to watch about it. But nobody really believed his theories until after he died. And then after he died, when we had better microscopes, they discovered, wow, he was spot on with what he was saying. So let's find out what he was saying. Okay, so one of the first words I want to talk about is heredity. So heredity is the passing of physical characteristics from parent to offspring. Okay, so this is why we resemble our parents, because we inherit certain characteristics from them. You and your sibling, unless you're a twin, you and your sibling don't look exactly alike, but you look similar. There's similar traits, okay? Because there's so many different combinations that you can inherit from your parents. That's why we look similar to our siblings, but not exactly like them, because of just the vast number of things that we can inherit. And just because you can't see a certain trait, we're going to talk about dominant and recessive traits. A recessive trait, well, I'll talk about that later, but just because you can't see a certain trait doesn't mean it's not in your genetics. That's the other thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. So each specific characteristic, such as, now we're going to talk about the pea plants that Mendel researched with, the height of the plant, the color of the seed, because they can be different colors, that's called a trait. So for you, your brown hair, blue eyes, the color of your skin, those are all traits that we inherit. Okay, so Mendel's discoveries from the foundation of genetics. So genetics is just the study of heredity. So this whole thing that we're doing, we are studying genetics, how traits get passed from parent to offspring. So the next word is fertilization. A new organism begins to form when the egg and the sperm join in a process called fertilization. So now for this, for pea plants, this is pollinization. Okay, for plants, it'll be pollinization. And that's why it's so windy in the springtime, in the early spring. It's nature, the trees literally evolved to start sprouting its flowers so that it can make fruit, so we can have food. But this is all happening because on our planet, in this time of year, it's super windy. And the wind helps the pollen to blow out of the flower and to go to other flowers on nearby trees of the same species. And that's called pollinization. So that's the reason why it's windy. Everything evolved and came about for a reason. All right, so let's see here. Before fertilization can happen at pea plants, the pollen must reach the pistil of the pea flower. Okay, so here you can see in the plant. Okay, here we have pollen, and that pollen has to go to the pistil and fertilize the plant. Now, from this in this area, you're going to get the pea pod. Any plant that fruits is has to be fertilized in this way. So bats, small birds, flies, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes drink pollen. If you knew that, most of the time they don't drink our blood. Only females, when they're about to lay eggs, will try to drink our blood. But male mosquitoes drink pollen, and females do at other times of their life. All kind bees, we know that bees and butterflies and moths. So all of these animals help with pollinization too. And without them, we would have no food. So now, a purebred organism is the offspring of many generations that have the same form of a trait. So that's saying like generation after generation, everybody has blue eyes, blue eyes, blue eyes. Okay. That probably means that in the genetics of that family, there is no brown eyes. But every once in a while, you'll see like another trait pop up, right? Like people will say, oh, that skips a generation in my family. But what that really means is that there's a hidden trait that isn't seen, but every once in a while, it comes out. Okay, so that wouldn't be purebred. So let's take a look at, well, this is figure one. We don't have to do this figure one, but Thank you, computer. But what Mendel did was he tested for different traits. He wanted to see if I crossed this tall pea plant with this short pea plant, what would happen? So he literally did his own cross pollination. So what he would do is he would cut off. You can see how this, see where the pollen parts of this plant are? He would actually cut these parts off so that the plants could not pollinate. And he then took a little paintbrush and he force pollinated with the other plant. So he pollinated white flowers with purple flower. Okay, so he crossed certain plants that he wanted to see what would happen if I crossed the purple flower with the white flower, a tall plant with the short plant, a yellow pea with a green pea. Okay, different things like that. So that's why he did this himself with the little paintbrush. Okay. So let's go to, okay. So let's continue. I had a little outage with my Wi-Fi. All right. So anyway, let me see if I can remember where we left off because I was actually trying to reset it. So anyway, so what happened was, let's take a look here at some pictures of this. We call this the P generation, P for parent. So Mendel took two plants that he crossed. So they're the parent plants. And he took a tall plant and a short plant. And then in the next generation, we call that the F1. You don't have to remember this word. They have it written here. It's the first filial, F1, first filial generation. That's the children of these two plants. Every single plant, when he crossed a tall plant and a short plant, every single one was tall. Okay. And so it was like, what does that mean? And then something different happened in the F2 generation, the second filial generation. Second filial or the F2 generation are like the grandchildren of these two. So let's read what happened. He said, when these plants were full grown, Mendel allowed them to self-pollinate. So he didn't do it himself. He allowed them, some plants can pollinate themselves. They're self-fertilizing. Okay, so when these plants were full grown, Mendel allowed them to self-pollinate. The F2 or the second filial generation that followed surprised Mendel even more. He counted the plants of the F2 generation. Now, by the way, more than 4 grew, but we're leaving these numbers simple for this. And 3/4 were tall and 1/4 were short. So Mendel repeated his experiment. He started with the parent generation, then the F1 generation, and then he wanted to see what happened in the F2 generation. In all of his crosses, Mendel found that only one form of the trait appeared in the F1 generations, meaning he only saw tall plants in the F1 generation, the children. However, in the F2 generation, the grandchildren generation, the lost form, quote unquote lost, and I'll tell you why that's quote unquote in a moment, always reappeared in 1/4, in a quarter of the plants in that number. Okay. It was like mathematical. So 1/4. So if we have 4 plants, 1/4 is how many? You guessed it, it's 1. So for your first activity that you're going to write down here for figure 2, I have a whiteboard here. Okay. What you're going to do, and I haven't used this yet live, you're going to draw 1, 2, 3 tall plants. Now, this is just so hard to draw, so you can maybe make it a little bit better looking. But he said a quarter of the plants always showed the lost trait. The lost trait was that short, right? So remember, in the children generation, all the plants were tall, but in the grandchildren generation, the F2, 1/4 of them showed the short trait. So you're going to draw 3 long lines and then 1 short line. So that's how traits skip a generation, because they're still in the genetic line, but they can resurface. So grandma, okay, so if you're talking about your grandma had red curly hair. Everybody else had brown hair. Okay, all her children had brown hair, and then in the grandchildren, there was a couple that had that red curly hair. That's because her genetics was still in there. It just can reappear later on. Okay, so Let's see here. The next activity is going to be assess your understanding 1A and 1B. I went easy on you guys today. All right. So assess your understanding 1A and 1B. So define what happens during fertilization. Okay, so it's, we were talking about that with the plants and the pollination. So what happens during fertilization? Okay, your pictures are here. So what happens is, an egg and the sperm cell unite. Now, we'll talk later about sexual and asexual reproduction because in asexual reproduction, it's the organism makes a clone of itself. So that there's still fertilization that happens, or there's still a process that happens, but this is when you have male and female. Okay, the egg and the sperm cell unite, and that happens with plants, with animals, with fish, and sometimes it happens in different ways, but this is the fertilization that we're going to talk about today. All right. And then B, okay, 1B says compare and contrast in Mendel's cross for stem height. How did the plants in the F2 generation differ from the plants in the F1 generation? So remember, in the F1 generation, all four of them showed the trait for tall. In the F2 generation, remember our picture, only it reappeared, the trait that disappeared in the F1 reappeared here, okay, in the F2 generation. So how was it different? Go away. Okay, so what you're going to write was some F2 plants were short. Simple as that. Okay. Let's go back here because I want to go over a couple more vocab words with you. Close that menu out. Okay. So actually we are going to stop here with the workbook because tomorrow you're going to be doing activities on pages 77 to 79. So I just want to do little chunks of this genetics at a time. Okay, and we're going to talk about you have to wait for the story to figure out why traits skip generations and all that good stuff. So anyway, going back to your activity list. Here we go. Thank you. Okay. After you complete that, I want you to watch this video. It's from a website about Gregor Mendel, a little bit about his story. And then there's an article there. I want you to read the rest of the story. And then I want you to do the ed puzzle. This is where you have to write down your how many you get out of 10. Complete that ed puzzle. It's fun. And right here, I tell you, you will be selecting turn in on May 20th. So that's when all of these activities are going to be due, May 20th. Okay. If you haven't finished your project, please keep working on your project. And that is all I have for you today. So CG out.